You know how sometimes it feels like Google is eavesdropping on you because you keep getting all these targeted ads of things that you've been thinking about buying and you're like, how did they know? I feel like that's sort of what's happening with me and the YouTube algorithm recently because I keep getting these Project Pantry videos up in my feed. How did they know? So in case you haven't seen any of these videos, Project Pantry is essentially kind of like a cooking challenge. So you're looking at what ingredients you already have available in your pantry, in your freezer and in your fridge. So things that you might have been avoiding or things that you've sort of forgotten that you had. And you use primarily these ingredients in whatever meals that you're cooking throughout the week. And all of this is in attempt to prevent food waste, to save a bit of money, of course, because you've already spent the money on these products and it would be a shame not to use them. And finally, it's a way to be a little bit more creative in the way that you're cooking. All things that we love. I also really enjoy watching this style of video and seeing what other people get up to when they're cooking with scraps or whatever random items they might find in their cupboards. So I wanted to give this a bit of a go just as a nudge to clear up some much needed space on my own shelves. Normally I would just do this kind of thing like right before moving flats when you're going through everything that you have. So one time I ended up making like a Thai red lentil lasagna, which was actually really tasty. So let's see what sort of things we can come up with this time. The first thing I did was to make an inventory of everything that I had available in the fridge, in the freezer, and in my pantry. Looking at this list really helped to give me some ideas on ways in which I could combine these ingredients to create new meals. And here's everything that I made for the first week. First up, I wanted to tackle this bag of frozen cranberries. I'm not entirely sure why I bought this, but I'm guessing it was to use in something over the Christmas period last year. And instead of using it, it's just been sitting in the bottom drawer of the freezer ever since. So I decided to make some smoothies with soy milk, water, bananas, some peanut butter, and the scraps of a bottle of agave syrup that has been sitting on the counter for ages. This was actually really tasty and turned out to be a beautiful sort of purpley red color, but I would say definitely use ripe bananas and be generous with some additional type of sweetener because the cranberries are pretty tart if you don't. For the first actual meal, I wanted to use up this bag of Linda McCartney sausages from the freezer, some sun-dried tomatoes, and about half a jar of basil pesto from the fridge. So I started by frying the sausages in some of the oil from the sun-dried tomato jar. Personally, I love fennel, but my boyfriend does not, so I took half of the sausages out of the pan at this stage before adding in the fennel seeds and some black peppercorns. After toasting these for a minute or so, I then added in some sun-dried tomatoes, followed by nutritional yeast, a couple of tablespoons of the pesto, the cooked pasta, and some reserved pasta water. For our third meal, I wanted to use up these bits of bread and a bag of spinach from the freezer. I cut the bread into cubes to turn into croutons, so I tossed them with some garlic, some rosemary, salt, pepper, Italian herbs, and some olive oil, and then baked these until crispy. Some of these turned out a little bit burnt, but they were still tasty. And then with the spinach, I made a simple soup with frozen peas and some oat cream, which was one of the few items that I actually bought for this week. I then used the garlic croutons as a topping for the soup to make it a little bit more filling and a little bit more exciting. Continuing on with the fennel theme, I found this very sad looking guy in the back of the fridge. I also wanted to use up the rest of the pearled spelt that I used as part of my eating only British food for a week video, so I decided to make a fennel risotto. There wasn't quite enough spelt to make 4 portions, so I topped this up with some sushi rice, which I think works pretty well as a substitute for arborio rice, but there might be some risotto connoisseurs out there who will disagree. This recipe also called for some lemon zest, and I didn't have any fresh lemons, but I did have these 2 scraps on the counter that had already been zested for another recipe that I used over the weekend. But there seemed to be enough around the edges to get a little bit more lemon zest for this particular dish as well. So that was a lucky bonus, and I felt like I was really fitting into the challenge. I've had a lot of seitan stuff in the freezer after watching this great tutorial from Let's Eat Plants back in August. I'll link it down below, but it included these chicken-style fillets. So I decided to use these as part of a meal that we used to be absolutely obsessed with a couple of years back, but we haven't really been making so much recently, which is this simple 5-spice stir-fry sauce. The first time I ever made anything with 5-spice was actually in a sort of Project Pantry-esque situation. It was after I found a jar of 5-spice in a family member's pantry after they had moved into a care home. I'm very happy that I decided to give it a try because now I absolutely love anything 5-spice spiced. Next up, I wanted to use up this jar of green lentils, some lasagna sheets, and this peri-peri marinade that my boyfriend bought as a pasta sauce many months ago. So with these items, I decided to make a lentil lasagna with a tofu ricotta. The first step here was to soak the lentils overnight, and I also made the tofu ricotta the night before to save a bit of time, because making lasagna can definitely feel like a very long-winded project. Although I will say this one was pretty quick to throw together. For the ricotta, I combined a block of tofu, some garlic, nutritional yeast, and olive oil. This turned out to be a little bit dry, so maybe a few splashes of lemon juice or something would have been a nice addition. The next day, I combined a sauteed onion, added the pre-soaked and now boiled lentils, the peri-peri marinade diluted in some water, and then some sun-dried tomatoes. I then layered these in an oven-proof dish with the tofu ricotta and the lasagna sheets, topped it off with some vegan cheese, and baked it in the oven for about half an hour. I had this with a side of store-bought hummus because hummus makes everything better. For a quick lunch, I wanted to use up some frozen edamame beans, half a pack of soba noodles, some salted peanuts, and a head of broccoli. So I started by boiling the noodles and the broccoli in the same pot and then added in the edamame beans nearing the end just to defrost. Whilst this was boiling, I made a quick dressing of peanut butter, soy sauce, some vinegar, grated ginger and garlic, a splash of lime juice, and a splash of hot water. I also had this tiny bit of leftover sriracha that is normally pretty tricky to get out of the bottle, so I cut this open just to scrape out the last bits of it. Then it was just a matter of mixing everything together and topping it off with some chopped salted peanuts. This peanut butter powder is a great example of me buying something, but without really knowing why or what I intend to use it for. But this week I made a little iron booster snack, so I combined the peanut butter powder with some wheetabix and a sliced banana, sprinkled a generous serving of the peanut butter powder on top, and then pouring some soy milk over it. This is essentially like peanut butter flavored cereal. And it actually turned out really yummy, but if anyone has ideas on what to use peanut butter powder for, please feel free to share any ideas in the comment section. For the final boss of this episode, I had this mystery chili that I found in the freezer. It was dated on the 21st of March this year, but that's it in terms of clues that were provided. It turned out to contain some black beans, some sweet potato, and a lot of paprika. I guess this serves as a good reminder to be a bit more specific when labeling things before you put them in the freezer. But I did what any reasonable human would do, and I turned it into some delicious nachos. So that is everything for today. Overall, I would say this was a pretty fun way of cooking because it does allow you to get a bit more creative with how you combine your ingredients. As an added bonus, it ended up being quite a low spend week. I think the only items that I purchased would have been the courgette, 2 things of oat cream, and then a tub of hummus, some vegan cheese, and the tortilla chips. So this video was a little bit different than my usual style, but I hope you've enjoyed it and maybe even found some inspiration of looking through what items you have available at home and seeing how you can combine them to create some new meals. If you've enjoyed this video, please feel free to give it a like, and as always, thank you so much for watching.